Well, welcome everyone. I know people are still coming in, so welcome to our Fireside Chat, our first Fireside Chat with this series. We're so honored to partner with Fordham GSS and Deborah McPhee. So I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, and I'm just really happy that everyone's here. Deborah, thank you so much for your partnership, and we're really excited about this. So welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm Deborah McPhee. I'm the Dean for the Graduate School of Social Service, for those of you that don't know the school or don't know me. But it's such a joy and a pleasure to always have the opportunity to partner with One Girl. We sort of have a special affinity between GSS and One Girl. I think we share some pretty big commitments, such as protection of human dignity and resilience of individuals and communities, the potential of everyone, actually the necessity of everyone to participate in creating a society that sort of does not favor the few over the many. And I'm especially happy that we're here tonight to talk about how to make meaningful change in a world that is rapidly changing in ways that are sometimes hard to get our head around, where rules and laws that we've always relied on are suddenly fragile, and somehow facts and opinions are now equivalent. So I think that I think we have a lot to talk about, and I'm thrilled that we're going to be talking about the different ways in which we can make meaningful change, because sometimes it feels very difficult to find a path. I will just put a plug in for social work, in that we stand out as a profession among helping professions, because we really believe that both persons and environment are equally important. So the task isn't to get people to change to support systems, but rather to ensure that systems support the well-being of people. So I could not be happier to be partnering with One Girl yet again. I think we have a great partnership over the years and a great kindred spirit together. And so on behalf of Fordham and on behalf of GSS, thank you, Meaghan. Thank you for having an opportunity for us to partner with you, and a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker tonight, Chelsea Miller.
Thank you, Deborah. That's amazing, and I couldn't agree more. And I think the work that you do is so important, and it's exactly why we love partnering with you and GSS. So thank you so much for being here tonight and for your partnership. Just a really quick housekeeping. All I really want to mention is that, if it's not obvious already, this is a webinar format. So everybody is not on camera. There's no audio, there's no video. And there's no chat. So there's really the only way to contact the team, or if you have a question, would be through the Q&A, which I believe is at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure you guys can handle that better than I can. So that's pretty much it. And we'll go until 8. And you're right, Deborah, there's so much to talk about. And I wish that we had more time, but we'll do our best tonight. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Chelsea Miller here with us tonight for this conversation. Chelsea is a social impact strategist and global speaker, CEO of CPM Global, co-founder of Freedom March NYC, named to Forbes 30 Under 30, and a nationally recognized leader in activism, digital media, and women's leadership. We actually first met Chelsea at our annual summit, Women in Charge, also in partnership with Fordham GSS, last November. And we're just so excited to have you here again with us, Chelsea, and to continue the conversation. So welcome.
Thank you for having me, Meaghan. Like you said, we met last year at the summit, and I couldn't stop talking about it to the team. And so definitely happy to be back in the One Girl community and to have these conversations. I think that they're necessary, they're important. I remember when I was in college, when I was on campus, when I was trying to figure out my own leadership path and journey. And I definitely know that these sorts of spaces was what helped me and kind of gave me an understanding of what the broader landscape would look like around leadership, social change, my own professional journey. And so anything that I can do to help someone else on their journey, I absolutely will do that. And so I'm excited for the conversation today.
Thank you. And again, I feel like there's so much we could cover. And you're right. It's necessary. It's a necessary time. And we really enjoyed having you at Women in Charge. And I'm happy because that's such a short amount of time that we can hear from you. And so I'm really excited about this. Again, too short of a time, but I'm excited about this. And I'd actually love to start with hearing a little bit more about you and your story personally. You've built your work at the intersection of activism, digital media, and leadership. What kind of first drew you into the work that you're doing now, and like how has your own story contributed to where you are? And you talked a little bit about when you were in school and things that were available or not. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal story and what led you here.
Yeah, definitely. I talk about this a lot, but I grew up actually in Brooklyn, New York, and so very familiar with Fordham as a New York City girly. But for me, growing up, a lot of my experiences, I was first generation American. I was raised by my mother, who's from Jamaica, and so I talk a lot about the experience of being first gen in New York City and the fact that New York being one of those places where yes, there is so much opportunity, but it's called the concrete jungle for a reason. And so while there is so much opportunity, it's always juxtaposed to, communities and families who are really struggling and trying to figure out how to navigate this broader system. And so that was a lot of my journey, growing up. And for me, I always was able to really see the contrast. You walk one block in the city and it's multi-million dollar apartments and high rises. And then you go 2 minutes over and it's a completely different reality. And sometimes it's in the same zip code, And so that stark contrast of wealth, of economic opportunity, of what it takes to really make it in New York to me is a microcosm of the American story. And so it was really important to be able to go to college, and I ultimately ended up graduating from Columbia University, studying political science. And while I was at Columbia, I actually ended up taking off a semester to work in the Obama White House during the 2016 elections on urban economic opportunity. After graduating, I ended up going the corporate route, thinking, let me see what happens there, and quickly realized that that was not for me. And so went full sorry, went full time starting my nonprofit organization that I had initially started at Columbia, but we scaled it as we went out, my co-founder and I, and that was Women Everywhere Believe. And
Mm.
so it was a leadership pipeline for women and girls across 20 universities. We were at HBCUs, we were at PWIs, you name it. And that's actually what I was doing right before the pandemic happened. And I'm sure we all remember the pandemic when we were told that it would just be about 2 weeks and this thing would be wrapped up, and before you know it, we're home for months and years, really. And so for me, during that time, that's when the George Floyd uprisings happened, and I decided to take to the front lines in New York as someone who came from a background of organizing and advocacy, and feeling like there really needed to be a lot of work around the storytelling and showing up for the family of George Floyd, and understanding that New York City is one of the media capitals of the world. And if we don't control the narrative around our stories, then someone else is going to do that for us. And so I led that organization and did that work. And ultimately, as I was on the front lines, I realized something really, really important, that this issue around narrative building and storytelling and being able to control our stories as leaders and as communities was not specific to the movement that we were seeing within the George Floyd protests, but was indicative of a larger issue, which is the fact that so many times we are underrepresented in media. And because of that, we are not given resources, we are not heard, we are not able to build sustainable movements. And I decided to do something about that. And I co-founded Freedom March NYC, and ultimately, after doing that, decided it was time to found and create CPM Global, which now is a strategic consulting company that works with organizations, companies across the world. The US, Africa, and the Caribbean are our primary markets, and we do strategic partnerships, consulting, storytelling, building out campaigns, working with leaders and NGOs to see the impact that we want, not just in the US, but on a global scale. And that has taken me to so many different rooms and places, and I'm incredibly grateful. And, this past year, I made Forbes 30 under 30, which feels incredibly surreal because I've been doing this work for years. And
Right.
this is great, but I think it's more a reflection of what happens when you continue to just do the work and you show up in your purpose and you follow your calling and you're strategic about where you are placed and how you build your tribe. And so this next chapter of the work looks like continuing to do that, continuing to center the voices that need to be centered and showing up anyways. And so that's what I'm doing.
Wow, that's amazing. Such an incredible story. And I love hearing the process of it. And because I think sometimes you hear the work that people do. And to me, I'm always wondering how did you get there and what was that path and everything. And so you very beautifully gave us all such a great picture of how that happened for you. When you first organized the Freedom March in 2020, now it's 2026. And I feel like COVID, I mean, it was like a black hole of time, right? It was like such a time warp, like so much has changed and it feels like so long, but also not that much time. I'm curious how you feel like leadership has changed now at 2026 versus just 6 years ago.
Yeah, I also see in the comments someone was asking to define PWI, and so I said HBCUs, that's
Right.
historically Black colleges and universities, and then PWIs are predominantly white institutions, and so just that
Thank you.
differentiator. And yes, I work a lot with universities, so sometimes I feel like I get lost in the jargon, but yes, so that's PWIs. And then going back to your question, Megan, around how leadership has changed, I think that for me, what I've noticed in this space, and I talk about this a lot, I think right now it's become less about who is most qualified to lead and more so about who has the largest or biggest mic or platform. And I think we have traded out character for soundbite material. And I think as a result of that, we are more focused on the attention economy now, which means that if you can be a leader that grabs attention and incites the masses, then ultimately that is going to be what is put at the forefront of
Right.
what your qualifications are, as opposed to considering how do you ensure that someone is qualified, that someone is able to really understand the charge and the responsibility of leadership. And then I would also say understanding the fact that as much as I say that, I'm also mindful of the fact that the reality is everyone's definition of leadership is different. And though there are qualities that I look to when I think about historically people that I admire, right? You're talking about MLK, you're talking about, Rosa Parks, you're talking about so many leaders, FDR, right? Leaders who to me have set a precedent of what does it mean to show up and do the work. But I'm also mindful of the fact that there is still a huge percentage of our country that values leadership, not in the sense of whether or not you have the qualifications, but whether or not you make them feel seen. And I think that's also really important to understand because if we do not take the time to really look at what it is that's happening across not even just our country, but the world and what people are looking to as their signals and how they are approaching community and showing up and how they're voting and how they're understanding positions of power and who is deserving of those positions, then we are discounting those narratives. And as someone who is a media strategist, that's not something I can do because we can't afford to erase other people's perspectives because in doing so, we continue to exist in echo chambers numbers that will ultimately serve no one. And so while I can definitely sit here and say that my definition of leadership is very different from perhaps 50% of our country, I will also say the fact that to me, I understand that there is a connection between where we are digitally and what's happening with attention spans and the loneliness epidemic and the way that the internet has played a part in creating and driving polarization, and how that is also a reflection of how our communities are understanding trust in institutions, how that is then ultimately also leading to a shift in who is getting elected and why and what issue areas people care about. And so it's really understanding all of the pieces of the puzzle and kind of how you put them together. So that was a very long-winded way of saying things are changing very
Yeah.
well, but it is because of so many other pieces that a lot of times we aren't necessarily paying attention to that also are playing a part in
Sure.
how we're seeing the conversations around leadership unfolding.
Right, absolutely, and for sure, social media and this digital age now is playing such a huge part too. Um, I there's so many things I think when we talk about that there's a lot of things that we're getting. I don't know that we're getting wrong, but that is concerning, right? What do you think we're getting right when it comes to that? What do you feel that is really working well?
That's such a funny question because I feel like most of my work is like focused on what we're getting wrong. So I'm
What are
like,
you
what do we
getting
get
wrong and how to
right?
fix, right? Like, sure.
Where should we give out some flowers? Okay, so
Yeah.
I
If you
think
can.
if I can, don't worry, I'll try. So I think that what we are getting right is really understanding the fact that generationally there are shifts happening, right? And so when we take a look at Gen Z and we're seeing the way that they are building community, their understanding of, for instance, something like civic engagement, right? And I think historically, especially when you take a look at data and polling that has been built around this, there used to be a time where, people really believed that Gen Z was just so politically disconnected, didn't
Mhm.
care about community building, was just simply on their phones, right? All of the very basic narratives that are just like stereotypes, really just like blanketing it over a generation. And what happened over time is that there were studies that came out that showed actually that despite the fact that there was an increase in distrust of political institutions and, government and all of these things, there was also the finding that Gen Z was very much so engaged in things like community building and
Mhm.
starting community gardens and mutual aid and donating on nonprofit platforms like a GoFundMe and supporting their neighbors and doing grocery drop-offs. And so I think in that way, understanding how to interpret and read generational shifts and being able to speak to that. And I think similarly, when we're looking at Gen Alpha, and this is, I mean, I can go into a rabbit hole on this, but there's a lot that's showing that even Gen Alpha is going to be very different in how they engage with institutions and technology than Gen Z
Mhm.
because they've seen the
Yeah.
impact that tech has had on Gen
Mhm.
Z and they're not really that interested, right?
Mhm.
And so you're going to see more reluctancy to follow, on social media. Now the follow button has a higher value for this generation. Now the things that they're engaged in are different. Now how they are consuming content looks very different, right? There was this belief that, you know, um, younger generations, their attention spans are so much shorter now, and
Mhm.
because of that, they can only consume 6 seconds of content. And I was actually at a summit a few months ago and I spoke about the fact that, well, that's because that has been the primary vehicles and the algorithms that have been received, the Instagrams and
Right.
the TikToks of the world. But there's the rise of Twitch and streaming
Mhm.
platforms that's showing that actually younger generations are consuming a lot more content and media and their attention spans are fine, right?
Right. Right.
Granted,
Yeah.
it's going to take a lot more work and there needs to be a reconfiguration of how we
Mhm.
consume content, but there is proof of concepts that show
Right.
that there is an ability to consume larger or longer amounts of content in something like the streaming world, where you have streamers like Kai Cenat who are doing 24-hour streams, 30-day streams, and you have young people tuned into that. And so I think that what we are seeing is, one, this new understanding of how we connect, and understanding that just because the traditional platforms that once existed are no longer the barometers that we're using to check, it doesn't mean that people aren't connecting. And then I would say the second piece around what I think that we're getting right is really taking the time to allow young people to lead in a way that I think historically we haven't seen as much infrastructure around. Every day I feel like I go on LinkedIn, I see a new opportunity connected to young people, whether that be a fellowship, whether that be an internship, whether that be funding, to support different ideas, or institutions taking the time to figure out how they can embed young people, not just at the receiving end of programming and initiatives, but in the planning stages as well. And so I think that between what's happening on the tech side, and I think institutionally what's taking place as well, there's a huge opportunity there for emerging leaders to be at the center of conversations, and for a lot of restructuring of plans. And that gives me hope, because I know that, at least in my journey, that it definitely took mentors and leaders who gave me space to lead and ideate and be creative around the solutions, the problems that I was seeing, that ultimately were stepping stones to my work. And so I think more of that for young people and emerging leaders is really going to be a game changer. And I think,
Yeah.
as for what I see right now, we're definitely making pathways towards that.
That's awesome. That's amazing. It's interesting, right? This whole new landscape, I guess. But you said something that, like, the things that people are gravitating towards, and the community involvement, it sounds like it's the same, right? The things that we've been doing for a long time. People even just wanting to connect, building community. It's just that maybe the pathway is different, or the barometers are different, or the vehicles might be different, or the tools, I guess. So that's all really interesting too. Someone who is kind of at the center of all of this, how do you use your voice online to be impactful and responsible? Because I can imagine that, especially today when there's so much going on, when we talk about, social media and an online presence, do you ever feel that that's a challenge, or something that you think about, or how do you balance that?
Oh, absolutely. I go through so many different stages of engaging with content. I think at this point, like, the team gets so frustrated with me, because they're like, Chelsea, do you want to go all out and be seen on everyone's front
Right.
page? Or would you rather be silent and be like, you know what, for
Right.
today, I'm choosing my piece. So,
Mhm.
I think that it really depends. I think that for me, when I was deep in my front lines organizing work with Freedom March NYC, I understood the importance of visibility as connected
Mm.
to being able to control my own narrative, because I understood that there was so much media and press at the time that was coming out that could easily paint me as a caricature, and I didn't want that.
Sure.
And so I felt the need to make sure that I was consistently visible, showing the many sides of myself. Whereas now, as someone who leads a global strategic firm, right, it's that balance of how do you make sure that you are still showing up online and building community, but also understanding that so much of the work now for me is behind the scenes. And so, how do I balance that out? But I've ultimately decided that I think the power of the internet is being able to control your own story and also bring people on the journey with you. And I understand that so many of the representation that I saw when I was younger, I can attribute to the women leaders who showed up on my timeline. And so I don't want to not be that for someone else. I feel like that sense of responsibility to do that. But also, how do you do that and still make it fun, right? Because I think
Right.
the internet has become a rather insidious place, right? Where algorithms outweigh so much of how we understand each other and how we relate to each other, but choosing to push back against that, right? And I think
Yeah.
one of the beautiful things about being a strategist and being in this work is understanding that there is that balance that you have to strike with how you show up in the work, and you can leverage the
Mhm.
algorithms honestly to your advantage if you know how, to be able to do the storytelling that you need to do and connect in the way that you want to. And so for me, that looks like building a platform that continues to show the many sides of myself, talking about traveling, talking about global issues, talking about the things that people should know, and really building it from there. And we actually just launched a series this past week called Your World Briefing that
Mhm.
really helps people to understand what's happening, not just in the US, but globally, and connect it to how they're showing up in their communities and how it impacts them and their families. And so
Wow.
I'm
I
really
love
excited
that.
to continue to do
Mm.
that, and really just taking advantage of more opportunities to show people the world, right? I've been to 23 plus countries. And so that's another thing that I want to do is make sure that I talk about traveling, to
Mm.
places that people would like to go or perhaps never considered, and also showing people that that's possible as well. And so, yeah, I would say that it's interesting because nowadays my social media isn't necessarily tied fully into, of course, our company's agenda, if you will, right? But it still is something that I make sure that I nurture and I build the community there because I understand that it's important.
Yeah, sure. When you have, it's a lot to balance. And when you are doing this work, I think anybody for doing this work, but maybe for you specifically, being out there, front facing so much in the travel, um, how do you balance, like, how do you protect your peace, I guess? I'm just curious if there's anything that you do to kind of reground yourself. And is it just taking some moments off, some days off? Or is there something else that you'd want to share with us?
Yeah, I would say definitely traveling. I can't stress that enough. I actually
Mm.
love traveling. I love discovering new places, new food. I'm a foodie, so that's important to me. But I would also say, as much as the work is a lot, I love what I do.
Mm.
And I think that there's something really beautiful about genuinely enjoying and feeling aligned with
Yeah.
your purpose, and that also being something that you get to wake up every single day to do. I was at an event a few weeks ago and I was telling someone about my work with CPM Global and working on all of these things. And mind you, she also, like has a job and all the things. And she was like, "You're living my dream life," right?
Mm.
Usually when people say those things, I'm like taken aback. But I think that was one of the, well, one, she was incredibly sincere. And so I didn't take, right, any type of offense to it or anything of the sort. But it really made me think about the fact that a lot of times we take the path that I think is safest because
Mm.
we're hoping that on the other side of that, that's where fulfillment lies. And I think at every step of my journey, I've actually done the opposite. I've
Mm.
taken the path that I think has been the scariest, the most uncertain, and have just trusted God, have trusted myself, have trusted the fact that in the end, it'll be fine. And I think that even now, when we're talking about global work and advocacy, that is a completely
Yeah.
different playing field
Yeah.
than working in the US on democracy and civics and all of those things, because the amount of stakeholders that you are balancing at any given
Mhm.
time, and if it's something getting done in the US is anywhere from, I don't know, 6 to 8 months to close on a
Mhm.
conversation, a deal, a partnership, etc. When you're talking about multilateral institutions, governments, right? UNs, things of that sort, that could take anywhere from a year to 2 years because you are balancing so many different interests. And so for me, I think just being mindful of the fact that, like, one, it's okay to continue to learn and grow and evolve. And I give myself
Mhm.
space for that. I don't rush my process anymore. I'm not sitting here saying by the end of this year, here are all the things that I need to accomplish. I'm thinking about legacy and really laying the
Mhm.
foundation out for that. And I think that gives me a lot of peace and being able to wake up and focus more so on the impact and the journey and less on deliverables, 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 get it done, get it done. And so for that reason, I feel like that's one of the things that has not really led to me burning out, if you will, because I've
Mhm.
managed to find the things that I enjoy, right? Next week is the World Bank meetings in DC. You know, our team is flying in for it. We have our partners flying in for it. And I'm literally so excited. Like, I
Yeah.
can't wait to meet
Mhm.
everyone. And, you know, and I
Right.
think my other piece of advice is like, find people that you want to conspire with to do good in the world
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
make sure that it's a tribe that you built that you
Mhm.
enjoy being around and you enjoy learning from. And I think that's also what makes it really enjoyable for me is because I genuinely am so appreciative of the community that we built that is also
Mhm.
doing this great work with us.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so powerful. It sounds like you're balancing, it's kind of built in the balance. So it's not like you do the work and then you take a day off or something. It's already kind of built in as much as we all, need space and need time to rest. So that's really inspiring to hear that. And also I think when you really feel that you're, doing meaningful work, I think that does, allow you to be really present in it. So it sounds like you're doing that. That's really cool. What do you think is the one of, I guess, getting back into, some, advocacy work and kind of creating, meaningful change? What do you, this might be a difficult question, but what do you see as the biggest barrier to creating meaningful change today?
Hmm, I would say it's two things. It's one, the attention span problem, right?
Mm,
Everyone wants things very quick.
yeah.
We
Mm,
live in, it's coined as the microwave society, right? Let's just put it in, pop
right.
it out, it's
Right.
done. Um, and that's just not the reality of how change works, right? We
Mm,
talk about the civil rights movement
yeah.
that lasted for years. When we talk about the
Mhm.
boycotts that lasted for years, when we talk about any type of meaningful change that has happened within our society, for the most part, it has not been overnight.
Right.
And I think a lot of times we become frustrated because we are looking at where we were yesterday or 2
Mhm.
weeks ago or last year, and we say, we've lost some ground here.
Mm,
If you look at where we were 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, then it would put things in perspective. I think we are too quick to take stock when we are in the losing game, when we need to also make sure that we are taking stock when we're taking a look at our win/loss history. I'll just say that. And in doing so, you'll find out that we tend to move forward. It may take a lot of struggle and there tends to be a lot of the in between, but we have to be comfortable with the in between and not define that as defeat, but define
mm,
that as regrouping and recalibrating. And
yeah.
so for me, I think that once we are able to push past that, we will be in a better position. And then I think the second part of it is we spend a lot of time talking about the problem,
Mm,
not enough time focusing on solutions and asking ourselves the tough questions. I think that we like to, pretend that we are so innovative and we are, really seizing the problems by and the reality is we aren't, right? We are
mm,
still operating in red tape. We are
yeah.
still allowing so much of our movements and this work to be co-opted by institutional red tape and bureaucracy. And we believe that someone's going to save us. We think that there's someone that is going to do the hard stuff and ask the hard questions. And I have been in some of the most powerful rooms in the world, and I can confirm that there's no one coming to save us. Not any single room has the answers, and
Right.
more often than not, the solution is going to come from people, your ordinary people who
Mhm.
see a problem and want to do something about it
Yeah.
and refuse to stay silent and show up anyways. And because they show up, their neighbor shows up. And because that neighbor shows up, the community shows up. And because the community shows up, the world pays attention. And so once we get to that point of understanding that, I think it's going to be a game changer for how we choose to organize, how we choose to create impact, and
Mm.
also how we choose to measure our wins.
Mm. Wow, that's amazing. For people, for maybe the students here, or people that might be early in their career who want to create meaningful impact, and have, see things that they're unhappy with, and they want to be part of the change. What can you say as far as like, how do you actually start? I feel like there's so many problems, right? There's so many things and there's so many barriers, or feels that way anyway. And then you have the whole social media thing. Is there anything that you would say or any advice that you have for people to actually get started?
Yeah, I would say start with something. And I know that that sounds like, duh, of course, Chelsea, start with something. But literally, I think sometimes we psych ourselves out of being a part of the solution because we believe the problem is so great.
Mhm.
And the reality is that systems only work when we do, right?
Mhm.
Like, in order for oppression to occur, in order for systems to continue to fail us to a certain extent, and I want to say certain extent because there are exceptions to this, but for the most part, especially when we're talking about Western society, it requires the silent buy-in of the people. And
Mm.
I think a lot of times we miss the mark because we are so focused on this huge systemic issue that we miss the
Yeah.
fact that in order for, like, think of it, right? It's like an engine. It's like, yes, the engine is big and the whole operation is big, but you put one little pin in that, you put one little disruption in that, the entire
Mm.
machine shuts down.
Yeah.
And so we have to figure out what are those little points that we are going to put in a machine to shut it down.
Mm.
And I think that the best way to approach the problem is to think about what are the things that are the closest to you. You know,
Mm.
saw I don't know if it was an article or something a few weeks ago that spoke about the fact that we are so quick to want to run for national
Mm.
offices and to be, seen on a national scale and do all these things. And it's like, well, do you know that what is happening in your local community impacts you the
Mhm.
most?
More.
You know that for the most part, school board meetings, city council meetings, those things are open to the public. If
Mhm.
you go and you show up and you disrupt, that is more likely to get picked up by media. That is more likely to build a movement around it and a community,
Mm.
leaders, etc., because it's something that people can feel and see. And so that school board meeting and that conversation and what happens in your community, another community can take that and replicate it.
Right.
And so really thinking about what are the issues that you care about the most? What are the things you are most proximate to? And creating that solution around it. And maybe it's as simple as like, I may not necessarily be the person that is going to solve it, but I'm going
Mhm.
to bring the people together who can. And
Yeah.
I think really thinking about it through that lens opens up so many possibilities because you no longer put the full system on your shoulders. You understand that it is possible to carry it with community. And I think
Mhm.
that is the most sustainable way to not only lead, but also to create impact.
Yeah. Yeah. So starting small, starting with what you know, and joining with others, right? Creating that community or finding that community. Um, that's really inspiring, and so true. I can ask you so many questions. I have so many more things I'd love to hear about, but I know that we actually have a lot of questions, that came through. So I'm going to open up to the Q&A. So, Adele, if you want to just come on and maybe read a couple questions for Chelsea. These came from our people who registered for tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. Well, I do have one question, and this might here today in the chat, and this might be a little challenging. What was your most favorite place to visit? Because you were talking about how travel is really important to you.
I love this question. Thank you for asking that. That was a good one. Do you see how my face just lights up the same?
Yeah.
But the answer to that would have to be Ghana. And I visited Ghana in 2019 for the year of the return, which was the 400-year mark of when the slaves left the coast of Ghana and were carried to, the US and all of the places and things of that sort. And for me, that was just so life-changing and eye-opening to one, of course, being from Jamaica, that's where my family's from, but understanding the Middle Passage, right, the Atlantic slave trade and how it connects. And it was something that, of course, I read about, understood from PBS documentaries and all the things. But to go there and be on the land in which so much history existed, right, to go and visit Elmina Castle, where they tell you the stories of the experiences of, women who were enslaved, men, children. It was heartbreaking, but also was a reminder of our responsibility and the fact that we are here. And I spoke about this, I think, a few weeks ago as well. We are not here by accident. Like, we are all here because someone fought for us to be here. Whether that be because you're American and people said, you know what, I'm tired of this tea tax and y'all aren't going to tax our tea. And they decided they were going to do a whole revolt and that led to the American Revolution. You are now an American because someone fought for you. Whether or not you're a woman, right, who now you're able to use your credit card freely. Now you are able to vote and do all of these things. It's because the suffragists said we've had enough, right? Whether it's because you are a Black person, that is because of the civil rights movement, right? Like, you are here because someone fought for you. And I think a lot of times we become complacent with society and the world, and we think, oh my gosh, like I've just had enough. I've had enough. I've seen enough. I'm tired. And we don't actually realize that the next generation depends on what we choose to do today.
Right.
And I think that for me, that was one of those moments of just like reckoning with myself and like, what is going to be my legacy? How do I show up and do this work? And so to this day, Ghana is still one of the places that we work really closely with. We now do so much about our work across the continent, and Ghana is our base. And so Ghana hands down. And then of course I'm biased, so I'm gonna say Jamaica because you have to try our ackee and saltfish and breadfruit. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you for the recommendations. That's gonna go on my list for sure. Okay, I have another question. We did a question bank on social media. So, can you share a moment where you realized the impact your voice was having online, especially, maybe with our younger audience, and how that shaped the way you show up?
Yeah, I think that I realized that my voice was having an impact online when I started getting emails from like PBS, 60 Minutes, BT, Hulu, right? All of these places saying, hey, we've seen you on the internet, your videos from protests, all these things, and we want to interview you. And for me, I think that that was one of those moments of like, one, like, wow, this is wild. But then two, also, I think the reminder that what we create and the footprint that we leave does, in fact, have an impact, right? And when you talk about the digital footprint and kids having access to technology now at like 5, it's mind blowing, but that's another conversation. But
Another conversation.
that's another conversation. But truly, I think we take for granted the fact that when 20 people like your post or 200 people like your post, that is a room of people,
Yeah.
right? And I think that because we become so desensitized to the numbers, we forget our reach. And I think that it's so important that even on the days where you feel like nobody is listening, show up anyways, because
Mhm.
one day you are going to wake up and you're going to be surprised who has heard you and how far your sound has traveled. And I think that was definitely the case in 2020 with our work. And even today, with so much of what we're looking to do around the Your World briefing and telling the stories, and I've had posts this week that have been shared over 500 times, over 1,000 likes, over 20,000 people have seen it. And I don't take that for granted, because I know that there were times when I was putting together conferences and I was excited to have 100 people in the room. So why would I not be happy to have 100 people look at this informational that I posted, or look at this reel that I posted, or this video that I uploaded, just sharing my thoughts, because that is just as valuable. And so I think remembering that is really, really important when you are creating content or you are telling your story to the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's such a great reminder for everyone to just keep showing up and keep sharing about what they really care about. Another question we have for you is, how do you stay hopeful and motivated when the work can feel heavy and change can feel slow?
I love this question because, I get to heavily, obviously, influence our portfolio, because that is the perk of being the CEO. And I have committed, and, Nia's listening in on this. She's our campaigns and initiatives manager. So she will tell you that most of our work focuses on hope, focuses on the solutions, focuses on the most creative ideas of how we can solve the problems, bringing industries together, bringing unlikely partners together. And that gives me hope, right? That excites me, that invigorates me. And so I think that's what it comes down to. It's, how do you position yourself in the ecosystem to do the work that ultimately is going to help, that is ultimately going to reimagine? And how do you do that in a way that people can see it and feel it? And even if it's not see it and feel it today, you are building the foundation for generational impact. And because of that, I stay hopeful and excited, and I love that. And so most of our portfolio is focused on emerging tech, media, solutions around global capital and financing, and how do you move money to communities that need it the most, and how do you center the voices of young people in solutions, and strategic partnerships, and working across public and private sector. And so those are the things that honestly make me happy. Granted, I will say that, of course, there's so much going on in the world that is heavy and daunting, and that is not lost on me. And so much of my urgency is because of that. But I use that to fuel me in a way that focuses on, again, I have so much privilege that exists as one, just being an American, right? The privilege of being American, the privilege of living in the West, that the best thing that I can do to use that privilege and to use my voice and my gifts is to be a part of solving the problems. And I can't spend too much time focused on the defeat, because it is there and I feel it. But I also know that that can be very paralyzing if you allow it to. And on some days you can't control it either, And so I try to find that balance. And I don't just do this work for, again, the solutions of today. I think about, if this is our reality, is there a world that I can help create in the next 30 or 40 years that will be better than this one? And I focus on that North Star.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. I love that. Focusing on the hope, letting that be your driving force. You don't hear that a lot.
Yeah. Which is understandable, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And we work closely with the UN. And so many of the numbers that come out around humanitarian crisis that's taking place in so many different regions around the world, funding deficits that are happening right now. If you guys aren't familiar with the United Nations Office of, Humanitarian Response, UNOCHA is the abbreviation, but they do work where they're trying to save 87 million lives this year, and raise $23 billion. And of that amount, they literally have just done a little dent in the fundraising goals of that, because over the past few years, funding has declined for the UN and their humanitarian aid in the work, and that's directly impacting refugees and children lives. And we're trying to figure out, what is the media strategy? How do we engage stakeholders? How do we build funding campaigns, and make it grassroots? How do we think about how power is shifting and how to support with that? And so we see so many things coming down the pipeline for our partners, the broader ecosystem. But we do believe that if we are going to see that change, we have to do the work and roll up our sleeves, and we just show up to do it anyways, and trusting the fact that other people are just as committed to do that too.
Right.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's a part of finding the people that you'll do it with. So we're so happy to do this conversation with you. I'll pass it over back to Meaghan because we're kind of at the end. But thank you for answering some of our questions from our community.
Yeah, those were great questions. Thanks, Adele.
Thank
Well,
you.
we've covered a lot today, Chelsea, and I feel like there's probably so much we haven't covered still too. But I just wanted to give the opportunity, if there's anything, maybe one or two things that you could share, anything, to add to the conversation to people who are, young change makers or just people, looking to do impactful work. Is there anything that you can share to for takeaway that they could take away from this conversation today? Anything else that you want to add, even though there was so much good information there? But if there's anything else that you wanted to share.
I will start with this one because I definitely think that I don't want to understate how difficult this current climate is. And sometimes it actually frustrates me, the fact that like, we'll have conversations, people be like, oh yeah, just like it's all great and let's just keep marching forward. And it's like actually people are exhausted at the current state of the economy. People are trying to find jobs. People have been out of work for a year plus. We just actually, shared some news this past week amplifying the fact that 600,000 Black women are currently out of the workforce, have been laid off. And so, to that point, I think that it is so important to understand that everything that is happening right now is not by accident, it's by design. And one of the first ways to break people is mentally, right? And we've seen that in the ways that algorithms have made us turn against neighbors and communities. We've seen that in the way that algorithms have taught us to even sometimes hate ourselves, right? When you're talking about body dysmorphia and everything in between. Um, and so I think that or you're even comparing yourself, right, to the next person. And because of that, that's another issue around mental health, right? You feel like there's so much excess out there, but you're in a state of lacking. And the truth is that a lot of people are going through things, but are going through it silently. And so one of the biggest things that I would say is just really remembering your power and also understanding the fact that the current state of circumstances, conditions, and society is not a reflection of you and who you are, your worth, and your value. It's a reflection of the times. And we have to stay very aware of what is happening. And that's why we really push for a global understanding of markets, of politics, and everything in between. Because if you don't understand that, then you won't understand what's showing up at your doorstep.
That's
And
true.
you also won't give yourself enough grace, and so when you can't find that job, you're like, it's because of me, I've done something wrong, without realizing that, people are being laid off in mass because of AI, our, job infrastructure is changing, and everything in between. And there's a lot of people who are feeling it right now. They're just not
Yeah.
as loud. And then the second thing that I would say is just continuing to show up in spite of, I know that people say that the greatest place where you can go for knowledge is oftentimes a book, right? If you
Mm,
want, and they talk about it even in regards to the Black community, the place where they used to hide information from
yeah,
slaves was in the book. That's why,
right.
enslaved people were not allowed to read and all these things. But I would also take it a step further and say that sometimes it's not even in the books for a reason. And so you're going to have to be really curious and
Mm,
seek out information and go in the spaces to get the answers that you need. Um, and don't be afraid to do that. And don't be afraid to ask even the most basic questions, because you'd be surprised that sometimes the most senior leader in the room doesn't even have answer to that most basic question.
yeah.
Um, and so I would say don't be afraid to get back to your fundamentals and don't be afraid to question things, because that is oftentimes the places where you will have the most insight on what it is that you need to do, not just career, but also to make sure, again, that your family and your community is also protected and okay.
Mhm. I love that so much. And I actually wrote down like be curious. I love that so much. And if there's anything that we want to teach our children, right, is to ask questions always and be curious always. And so that's really beautiful. Thank you. Um, Also, before we end, I wanted to see if you wanted to share with our community like projects that you're working on or anything. And also, Alani asked if I can ask you if you could share just a little bit more about your newly appointed role with the UN. So, if there's anything, any work that you want to share with our community that you're doing, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. And so, one of the biggest things that we're doing this year, which we're really excited about, is actually a college tour where we'll be traveling. It's a youth leadership tour, speaking to students, right? Of course, this is a part of that tour. We'll be at Columbia University at the end of this month, which is also really exciting. And just making sure that we're doing our part of, again, inspiring, connecting with leaders and emerging leaders and having these conversations that need to happen. And then the second piece to Alani's question of my new appointment. So I actually have been newly appointed as a UN representative to the United Nations headquarters, which is really exciting for a NGO based out in Chad. And so that's also incredible to be able to do that work, not just with the UN, but of course with Chad regional leaders, doing more work around what we're building and developing across the diaspora and the continent connected to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations. And so essentially what that translates to is a lot more convenings, a lot more strategic conversations, and helping to mobilize capital to reach the people that need it the most, and really just leveraging our network and our partner communities to be able to do that. And so, yeah, really exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah, I first spoke at the UN about, I think it's now like 3, 4 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And so it's definitely a full circle moment to now
Yeah.
be able to not need a pass, guest pass slash visitor pass to get in, and now officially be a representative. And so really excited for that. And
Congratulations. That's really incredible. It
thank
really is.
you.
And it's inspiring and it's so great to hear that there's people like you participating in doing this work. And so thank you for all the work you do.
Thank
Really.
you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight. Again, there's so much I feel like we can, continue to talk about, but this is wonderful. And everybody will, I'm sure people know how to find you, but we're going to send an email out after this. So with any kind of information, we'll also for One Girl membership and actually current GSS students can join membership for free. So that'll be an email. So look out for an email from One Girl. And we look forward to having more conversations around leadership, meaningful leadership and change with everybody. So thank you all that have attended tonight. I wish we could see you all, but I know that you're there. And thank you for participating. And Chelsea, thank you once again. And of course, Deborah.